On a quiet summer day in the small town of Pine Grove, three friends named Mia, Carlos, and Ben rode their bikes down a dusty road. They laughed as the sun warmed their backs. Mia noticed a big, rundown barn ahead. Its wooden boards were gray and rotting. Thick weeds wrapped around the barn like hungry vines. Carlos skidded his bike to a stop, pointing at the barn. "We've never gone inside before. Let's explore," he said with excitement. Ben gulped, not sure if that was a good idea. He had heard spooky stories about the barn, rumors of shadows moving by themselves and ghostly whispers at night. Mia shook her head. "Should we really do this? My grandma says this place is cursed." Her eyes drifted to the second-floor window, which looked like a dark hole in the barn's face. But Carlos insisted they only wanted a peek. Maybe they'd see a raccoon or an owl, nothing more. The three friends parked their bikes under an old tree. As they walked closer, Ben tried to be brave. Tall grass rustled against his shoes. A breeze blew, making the barn creak. The wooden doors at the front were partly open, leaving a narrow gap. Mia pulled out a small flashlight from her backpack just in case. Carlos led the way, gently pushing the barn door. A musty smell spilled out, like old hay and damp wood. The inside was dim. Stray bits of light cut through cracks in the roof, forming beams on the dusty floor. The friends stepped carefully. Ben noticed a broken pitchfork on the ground and some rotted barrels. At first, nothing seemed scary. Just an abandoned barn with leftover junk. "See? It's just old and empty," Carlos said, sounding braver than he felt. Mia shone her flashlight around. Spiderwebs hung from the rafters. The place felt quiet, too quiet. Ben heard the thump of his own heart. They decided to explore deeper, stepping over planks and rocks. The floor groaned under their feet. Carlos teased that maybe a ghost would pop out and say boo. Ben forced a laugh. Mia stayed focused, shining the light on the walls. She spotted names carved in the wood like Tom 1980 or RK. Some carvings had strange shapes next to them, like eyes or twisted faces. Suddenly, a soft scuffling noise came from the corner. Ben's stomach twisted. Mia swung the flashlight beam toward the sound. Her hand trembled. They saw an old crate, but nothing moved. Carlos whispered, "Might be a rat." The barn door rattled behind them as though a gust of wind pushed it. All three jumped. Mia's flashlight flickered. Ben thought he saw a quick shadow dart behind a beam, but it vanished. He told himself it was his imagination. Still, his skin prickled. Outside, the sun shone bright, but inside the barn felt like nighttime. As they paused, scanning the barn's corners, a feeling of unease spread. Mia cleared her throat. "Let's not wander too far. Just a quick look, okay?" The other two nodded. Little did they know, stepping deeper into that barn would lead them into a growing nightmare. Mia, Carlos, and Ben ventured a few steps further. The floorboards squeaked under their sneakers. Dust floated in the flashlight beam. They spotted a rickety ladder leading up to the loft. Ben's eyes followed it up into darkness. Carlos nudged Mia. "We should check up there." He sounded excited, but Mia frowned. "Are you sure? That ladder doesn't look safe." She tapped one rung and it wobbled. Ben was about to protest, but Carlos was already climbing, carefully testing each rung. Mia tightened her grip on the flashlight, shining it upward. The ladder creaked with every step Carlos took. Finally, he reached the loft's edge and peered around. "Whoa," he said softly, "there's a bunch of old junk up here." He carefully pulled himself up, and Mia's flashlight beam flickered across dusty crates and a pile of rolled-up rugs. Ben sighed, figuring they shouldn't leave Carlos alone. So, one by one, he and Mia followed. The loft was cramped, the ceiling just a few feet above their heads. Cobwebs clung to the rafters. The air felt stuffy and smelled like old hay. Mia coughed. They walked carefully on the loft's wooden planks, which felt spongy. A few times, Carlos tested the boards with his foot to make sure they wouldn't break. Mia glanced at the rugs leaning in one corner. They looked torn and moldy. She wondered what was inside. Ben found a rusty lantern on a crate. He lifted it. "Think it still works?" he asked. Mia shone her flashlight on it. A spider crawled out of the lantern's nozzle, making Ben jerk back. Carlos chuckled nervously. "Spiders, that's all. No big deal." But he also glanced around, uneasy. Then a sudden thump echoed from below. They froze. Mia's flashlight flickered again, casting dancing shadows on the loft walls. "Was that the door again?" Ben whispered. Carlos shrugged. They all stayed still, listening. A quiet scraping noise followed, like something sliding across the barn floor. Carlos and Ben exchanged wide-eyed stares. Mia's heart pounded. She swallowed and said, "Maybe an animal knocked something over." but none of them moved. Fear prickled in the air. Ben noticed a shape near the corner of the loft. It looked almost like a person hunched by the crates. He blinked, focusing the flashlight in that direction. Nothing was there. A trick of the light, perhaps. He rubbed his eyes, feeling goosebumps. A strong draft suddenly whooshed through the barn, rattling the roof. Dust swirled and the entire loft seemed to groan. Carlos took a step back, nearly tripping over a broken stool. Mia grabbed his arm to steady him, but the stool clattered across the boards, the noise echoing. Ben said in a shaky voice, "I don't like this. We should go." Mia was about to agree when they heard the barn door slam shut below, as if by a strong gust or something else. The slam sent a chill through them. Now the only light was Mia's flickering flashlight, the barns inside growing darker by the minute. Carlos realized it might not be so fun to poke around anymore. They hurried back toward the ladder to go down. Carlos tested the ladder with his foot, but it wobbled more than before. "Be careful," he warned. Mia shone the flashlight down, seeing the barn floor about 10 feet below. They wondered if a piece of the ladder had cracked. Ben let out a slow breath. "We can do this one at a time." Mia nodded. She held the flashlight steady while Carlos began to climb down. The steps creaked loudly. Halfway, one rung snapped under his foot and he yelped, dangling. The other two gasped. Luckily, Carlos gripped the side rails and lowered himself the rest of the way. He called up in a strained voice, "I'm okay." Mia sighed with relief. Next, Ben tried to descend, feeling each rung carefully. Bits of rotten wood flaked off. He reached the bottom safely. Mia swallowed. She was the last. Her heart pounded as she edged onto the ladder. Each rung groaned. Suddenly, the rung under her left foot split, sending a jolt through her. She dropped down a few inches, gripping the rails tight. "Don't look down, just keep going," she told herself. Carefully, she lowered her feet, rung by rung, until she leaped off the last foot or so onto the barn floor. They all panted, thankful to be off the loft. Mia's flashlight showed the door area, which appeared shut tight. But no one had touched it. A swirl of dust hovered near the middle of the barn. Carlos walked over, tugging the door handle. It refused to budge. "Maybe the wind jammed it," he said, trying again. It was stuck as if sealed. "Push together," Ben said. All three pushed, but the door barely moved. A faint whisper seemed to drift across the barn, making them freeze. Mia turned her flashlight wildly but saw nothing. "The wind?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure. Then came a scraping sound like nails on wood. They turned to see a shadow flicker along the far wall. Ben's voice shook. "And maybe an animal?" But the shape was too tall, too human-like. Mia clutched the flashlight so hard her knuckles turned white. Carlos took a step forward, though his legs trembled. "Hello?" he called, his voice echoing. No response. Just the hush of the barn. Suddenly, the shadow darted behind a stack of crates. The trio gasped. Mia's flashlight beam quivered. They exchanged terrified glances. "We have to get out," Ben said. But the door was stuck. Another door at the back? Maybe. They remembered seeing a small back door to the barn once, but it might be locked or blocked by weeds. Still, it was worth a try. They tiptoed around the crates, heading deeper into the barn's gloom. Each step felt like stepping on broken glass, fear gripping their chests. The barn groaned again as though sharing a warning. Suddenly, from behind the crates, a soft rasping voice hissed, or was it just the wind? Mia's heart hammered. The children realized they were not alone in here, or at least it felt that way. The darkness seemed alive, pushing them onward in a silent chase. Clutching the flashlight, Mia led the way, trying to keep calm. The barn's interior stretched farther than they realized, with a row of stalls on the right, some fallen fences on the left. Carlos stepped carefully around broken boards. Ben's eyes darted everywhere, worried about the flickering shadow. They neared the back wall. The weak flashlight beam revealed a small door, half hidden by scattered tools and debris. The wood looked rotten, possibly easier to push open than the main door. Mia set her flashlight on a crate and tried the handle. It creaked but held. Carlos joined, trying to tug from a different angle. "It's stuck," he muttered. Meanwhile, Ben heard a scuttling noise behind them. He spun around, searching. Mia and Carlos pulled again and the door gave a little. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the stalls. They whirled around, hearts pounding. Mia snatched the flashlight, shining it toward the sound. An old metal bucket lay rolling in the dirt as though kicked by something. A shape moved in the corner of her eye, but the flashlight missed it. Racing heartbeats filled the silence. "Who's there?" Mia called, her voice shaky. No answer. Just the bucket's final wobble, clanging softly. Carlos rubbed his arms, feeling a chill. Ben whispered, "Could it be an animal?" But something in the air felt strange, heavier than an ordinary critter. They tried the door again, determined to escape. This time, Carlos yanked it with all his might, and the door popped open a crack. Fresh air rushed in. Relief washed over them. Maybe they could slip out. But the gap was small. They'd have to squeeze through. Mia held the flashlight so Ben could crawl out first. He turned sideways, pushing through the opening. The old wood scratched his shirt, but he made it out. He called, "I'm okay," in a hushed voice. Next, Mia began to angle her way through, passing the flashlight to Ben. Midway through the door, Mia felt something tug at her backpack. She gasped, thinking it was stuck. She twisted, trying to pull free. The barn behind her looked dark, shadows dancing. Then the tug vanished and she nearly tumbled outside. Carlos followed last, pushing through quickly. They all stood in the overgrown backyard of the barn. Weeds taller than their knees swayed. The barn's back wall rose like a black shadow. Mia looked at her backpack. There were fresh scratches on it, like claw marks or nails. She felt goosebumps. Had it snagged on a nail or was something else there? Looking around, they saw no easy path. The barn was surrounded by thick weeds and twisted fences. They realized they were now on the far side of the property, not near their bikes. They'd have to circle around. But at least they were out of the barn, if only that solved their problem. A growling wind rattled the barn walls as though annoyed at their escape. Mia let Ben keep the flashlight so she could wiggle free of the weeds. Carlos found a small gap in the fence. They aimed to return to the front yard and grab their bikes, desperate to get far away from here. The sky had grown dim with evening. Shadows stretched across the farmland. And in their minds, the barn seemed to watch them leave as if it might not be done with them yet. The trio picked their way through the tangled weeds, heading around the barn's side. The setting sun cast a fiery glow on the horizon, making the barn's silhouette look even more ominous. Ben led, shining Mia's flashlight so they didn't trip on roots or rusted wire. Carlos rubbed his arms. "I hope our bikes are still there." Mia nodded, scanning the ground for any sign of a path. Finally, they spotted the faint trail they used to arrive. Relief flickered in their eyes. Once they grabbed their bikes, they could rush home. They had no desire to spend another moment near that spooky place. But as they neared the front corner of the barn, they saw something that made them stop cold. Their bikes were gone. The spot under the old tree where they'd left them was empty. Mia felt her stomach drop. "Did we go to the wrong tree?" she whispered, half hoping. They glanced around. The area looked correct. The big tree's twisted trunk was unmistakable. No bikes leaned against it now, only dried leaves on the ground. Carlos's heart pounded. "Who would take our bikes?" he asked. No footprints were visible in the dirt. Could it be stolen? Or did the wind somehow topple them away? "That's silly," Ben said, voice trembling. Mia noticed a faint track in the dirt, like a drag mark leading away. They followed it a short distance, but it vanished near a patch of gravel. No bikes in sight. This was turning into a nightmare. They were stranded, the sun going down. Ben's eyes darted back to the barn's door, which still stood ajar. A flicker of movement caught his eye, like a shadow crossing the doorway. He gulped, stepping closer to Mia. The barn seemed to breathe in the twilight, each creak echoing. Carlos muttered, "We can walk home, right? It'll take a while, but we know the road." Mia nodded. "Yes, let's do that. We can't stay." She thought about her scratched backpack, about that shape in the loft. Something about this place was wrong. Very wrong. They started walking along the dirt road, the sun's last rays fading quickly. With the barn behind them, they hoped to soon find the main street into Pine Grove. But the road looked longer than they remembered, twisting past fields and an old fence line. A chill breeze whipped up dust. Mia flicked on the flashlight to guide them. They heard a distant clang back at the barn, like metal striking wood. Each kid shivered. They forced themselves not to look back, though curiosity gnawed at them. The world around felt too quiet. No crickets, no birds. Just the crunch of their feet on gravel. Darkness fully arrived and the moon rose, thin and pale. The children's hearts pounded, wanting to see the lights of town ahead. But after a mile of walking, Pine Grove was still not in sight. Ben whispered, "Did we take a wrong turn?" They paused, shining the flashlight around. The road looked the same, but they felt lost. The farmland stretched endlessly, shadows dancing in the moonlight. Carlos tried to remain calm. "Let's keep going. It has to be the right way." But a low, distant rustle made them spin around. Mia breathed fast. Were they being followed? None of them spoke, but dread settled deep in their chests. They continued trudging on the gravel road, each step heavy with fear. The flashlight's beam bobbed across the ground. Mia's arms were tired from holding it. Carlos and Ben looked over their shoulders now and then, worried that something from the barn might be following. Eventually, they reached a fork in the road they didn't remember seeing before. One path veered left, the other right, but no signposts or familiar landmarks showed the correct way to Pinegrove. "This can't be right," Ben said, frustration in his voice. "We only took one road to get here earlier." Mia tried to think logically. Could we have passed that fence line? Did we accidentally turn without noticing? She rubbed her forehead. The night played tricks with their eyes. Carlos mumbled, "Maybe we should backtrack or pick a path and hope it's right." Suddenly, a rumble of thunder muttered in the distance. Clouds drifted across the moon, dimming their only natural light. The flashlight's glow felt weaker than ever, as though the batteries were fading. "Let's not stand around," Carlos urged. "We have to choose a path." They decided on the left path, mainly because Mia recalled a slight bend in the original road. They walked on, hearts pounding. Every so often, Ben thought he heard soft footsteps behind them, but when he turned, only the empty road stretched. The wind in the weeds sounded like whispers. A drizzle of rain began, cold drops hitting their jackets. The kids shivered, wishing they had stayed home instead of exploring. Mia wondered if their families missed them yet. Probably so. They hadn't planned to be out after dark. She pictured her mom's worried face. Time passed slowly. The road twisted and turned. The drizzle turned into a steady patter. The flashlight dimmed further, flickering in and out. Mia tapped it, hoping to squeeze more life from the batteries. The children's shoes squished in the damp gravel. Up ahead, they spotted a faint glow. Could it be house lights or a street lamp? Relief flickered in their chests. They hurried forward, ignoring the ache in their legs. As they drew closer, they saw it was a single lamp post standing at a small crossroads, next to a wooden sign. Panting, they gathered under the light. The sign read Blue Creek Road in faded letters. This wasn't the road to Pinegrove, but at least they had a clue. Maybe if they followed Blue Creek Road, they'd find a highway or a house. A sudden gust blew, making the lamp swing on its post. Shadows swayed around them. Ben spotted a shape near the sign, a bent figure. He blinked and it was gone. He grabbed Carlos's arm. "I think something's there." Carlos cast the dim flashlight beam, but nothing showed. Rain picked up, dripping down their faces. They realized they had to keep moving, soaked or not. "This is the worst day ever," Carlos muttered, wiping water from his eyes. Mia nodded in silent agreement. A flash of lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the road. They took off down Blue Creek Road, footsteps splashing in puddles. The farmland was behind them now, replaced by a line of old trees. The wind rose, howling between branches. Each child wished for a warm bed, not these endless, muddy paths in the darkness. Lightning flashed again, revealing twisted trees lining Blue Creek Road. Rain hammered the children, soaking their jackets. The flashlight flickered once more, then died with a faint pop. Mia shook it, but nothing happened. They were left with only lightning bursts to guide them every few seconds. Ben's teeth chattered, and Carlos wrapped an arm around him, hoping to share warmth. Mia led the way, straining her eyes. The road felt endless under the storm's fury. Thunder rumbled, shaking the ground. They had never felt so lost. They stumbled over rocks and potholes. Each time lightning flashed, strange silhouettes danced among the trees. Ben tried to tell himself it was just branches or illusions, but fear knotted his stomach. Mia fought the urge to cry. If only they had never entered that barn, if only their bikes hadn't vanished. Then as they turned a bend, they spotted a faint glow in the distance, like a porch light or a lantern. Hope flared. "Look, a house maybe," Carlos exclaimed. The trio hurried forward, splashing through muddy puddles. Closer, they realized it was indeed a small cabin, set a bit back from the road. A single lantern flickered outside its front door. They paused at the edge of the property. The cabin looked old, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. But it was shelter from the storm. Mia asked, "Should we knock? What if nobody's home or they're mean?" Carlos shrugged. "We can't stay in the rain all night." Ben braced himself, then walked up to the porch. He knocked on the door with sounding hollow. Rain poured off the cabin's eaves. At first, no answer. They exchanged nervous glances. Then the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure in dim lantern light. It was a woman, her hair gray and messy, dressed in a worn sweater. She looked surprised to see children at her door. In a raspy voice, she said, "You're out in this storm? Come in before you catch your death." She beckoned them inside. They hesitated, glimpsing the cabin's shadowy interior. But the storm behind them was fierce, so they accepted. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and damp wood. The woman introduced herself as Greta. She asked, "What are you doing here alone?" Mia explained they got lost on the way home. She left out the barn details, not wanting to mention the spooky part. Greta nodded, eyes glinting in the lantern's glow. She said, "You can stay until the storm passes. I have some soup on the stove." Relief flooded the kids. They removed their wet shoes by the door. Greta handed them towels, her bony hands moving quickly. The cabin was cluttered with jars, dried plants, and odd trinkets. A single rocking chair squeaked in one corner. Yet something about Greta's smile made them uneasy. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Thunder boomed, shaking the walls. "Sit, warm yourselves," she said. The children found stools by a tiny table. Greta stirred a pot of soup, humming softly. In normal times they would be thrilled for warmth and food. But after the barn incident, trust came harder. Mia exchanged glances with Carlos and Ben. They whispered, "At least we're out of the rain." Still, they couldn't shake the eerie feeling that hung in the corners of Greta's dark cabin. Greta ladled thick soup into 3 chipped bowls, setting them before Mia, Carlos, and Ben. The steam rose, carrying a smell of vegetables and strong spices. "Eat up," Greta said in her raspy tone. Lightning flashed outside, briefly lighting the cabin's one window. The children blew on their soup. Ben took a cautious sip. It tasted different, herbal but not bad. Carlos felt too hungry to care, gulping a few spoonfuls. Mia nibbled more slowly. Greta watched them closely, a faint smile on her face. Rain battered the roof. Greta explained she lived alone, rarely having visitors. She asked them random questions. "Where are you from? Why are you out so late?" Mia hesitated, giving short answers. She didn't want to reveal too much, uncertain if they could trust Greta. As they finished the soup, Greta cleared the bowls. "You must be exhausted," she said. "I have some blankets in the back. You can rest here tonight." Outside, thunder rumbled. The kids exchanged looks. They knew traveling in this storm was dangerous, so staying might be best. Greta led them to a small back room. It had a single lantern glowing on a shelf, revealing 2 cots and a worn couch. The walls had odd drawings pinned up, spirals, runes, shapes that Mia found unsettling. But dryness and warmth tempted them to ignore the strange decor. "Thank you," Mia mumbled, forcing a polite smile. Greta nodded, then left them alone. As soon as she was gone, Ben said, "Something about her. I'm not sure." Carlos shrugged. "At least she's kind enough to share soup and let us rest." Mia looked at the drawings on the wall. One showed a barn shape with a big X over it. Another had a tall, shadowy figure. "Why would she draw this?" she whispered. The storm howled outside, wind rattling the shutters. They tried to settle down. The cots felt lumpy but better than nothing. Ben took the couch, his eyes flicking to the door. In the dim lantern light, the shadows on the walls looked like creeping hands. They all felt a tension in the air. Time crawled. Mia didn't really sleep, just dozed. At some point the floor outside creaked. She listened, hearing Greta's soft footsteps past the door. Then a whisper of laughter? Or was it just the wind? Mia's heartbeat quickened. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping morning would come soon. Suddenly, a soft knock on the door. Mia sat up. Carlos and Ben stirred. The door cracked open, Greta's head poked in. She whispered, "Need more blankets? It's getting colder." Her face looked pale in the lantern's glow, eyes reflecting the flame. The children shook their heads, politely. Greta closed the door, footsteps retreating. Mia's heart pounded. She didn't trust that smile. The smell of strong herbs lingered, making her slightly dizzy. Outside, the storm raged on, leaving them stuck in a mysterious cabin with a strange host. They hoped morning's light would bring clarity, or at least an escape from the growing sense of dread. Hours later, the rain eased to a light drizzle. A faint gray light seeped through the cabin window, signaling dawn. Mia, Carlos, and Ben rose from their uncomfortable sleep, yawning and stretching. Their clothes were still damp. They tiptoed into the main room. Greta was nowhere in sight. A pot sat on the stove, still warm from low fire. Something about the cabin felt different in daylight, less spooky but still cluttered with weird items. Ben found an open book on the table, its pages filled with odd symbols. Mia said quietly, "We should thank her and go. We need to find our way back to Pine Grove." Carlos nodded. He gently tapped on what looked like Greta's bedroom door. No answer. They exchanged glances. Maybe she went out? They decided not to linger. Quietly, they placed their bowls in the sink and grabbed their shoes by the door. Carlos wrote a short note on a scrap of paper. "Thank you for the shelter. We had to leave early." Then they slipped outside, the morning air cool and damp. The storm clouds lingered, but the rain had mostly stopped. The muddy ground squished under their feet. They saw no sign of Greta outside either. The children turned to the dirt path leading to the main road, relieved to be on their way. Walking for about a mile, they spotted a signpost reading Pine Grove, 3 miles. Joy sparkled in their eyes. Finally, a clue they recognized. They trudged forward, hungry and sore but hopeful. The farmland around them was quiet, the sky slowly brightening. After a while, they saw the first houses of Pine Grove. The kids practically ran the last stretch, hearts leaping. When they reached the familiar gas station at the town's edge, relief overwhelmed them. They hurried inside, breathless. A friendly clerk stared in surprise at their muddy, tired faces. Mia explained they'd gotten lost, needed help. The clerk let them use the phone. Carlos dialed his mom's number. Within minutes, parents arrived in a flurry of worry and tears. They hugged the kids tight, scolding them for going off on their own. The children burst into sobs of both apology and relief. News of the missing kids spread fast. Soon, Ben's parents arrived too, frantic with concern. The children apologized again, explaining how the barn trip went wrong, their bikes disappeared, and they ended up in a strange cabin. The parents listened, shaking their heads in disbelief. One mother said, "Let's report those stolen bikes to the police." Another said, "We should check that old barn. Something's not right." The children, though exhausted, nodded in agreement. They also mentioned the suspicious host, Greta. But describing the cabin's location felt tricky, as they had walked through the storm in the dark. For now, the priority was to bring the kids home. The families bundled them into cars, offering blankets and hot chocolate. As they drove away from the gas station, Mia glanced back at the road behind them. She couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone might still be watching from the shadows. They were safe in Pine Grove at last, but an unsettling memory of the barn and cabin lingered. Safe at home, each child tried to return to normal life. Their parents insisted they rest, drink warm soup and avoid late adventures. The kids agreed wholeheartedly. None of them felt like exploring for a while. But the mystery of the barn and missing bikes gnawed at them. Over dinner, Mia's mom asked, "Why on earth did you all pick that old barn?" Mia shrugged, saying they were just curious. She didn't mention the eerie shadows, not wanting to sound silly. A day later, Ben's dad filed a police report about the stolen bikes. The officer listened, a bit confused about how the bikes disappeared. The kids told him about hearing strange noises in the barn, but the officer only nodded politely. "I'll have a look," he promised, though he didn't sound very convinced. Carlos's family also felt uneasy. "Carlos, please, no more sneaking off to weird places," his father scolded. Carlos simply nodded. He still remembered the flickering shadow in the loft, the weird door slamming by itself. He had enough nightmares about it. The 3 friends reunited at school after a couple of days. Fellow classmates asked where they'd been. The kids gave brief answers, saying they got lost in the storm. Some classmates teased them for being dumb explorers. Others were intrigued. Mia, Carlos, and Ben felt too worn out to argue. Meanwhile, a rumor spread around town that the old barn was haunted. Some teens joked about going there at night, but most people shrugged it off as kid stories. A few older folks claimed the barn used to belong to a strange family decades ago, rumored to practice dark traditions. No one confirmed the details, just swirling gossip. At recess, Mia told Carlos and Ben that she couldn't stop thinking about the scratched backpack and the shadowy figure. "I know something was in there," she whispered. "And that cabin with Greta. So weird." Ben agreed. "We never saw her again. I wonder if the police found the place." Carlos admitted, "I have a feeling the barn is connected to that cabin, or maybe that lady is connected to the barn. It's all creepy." They stood quietly, remembering the fear. In broad daylight at school, it felt distant but not forgotten. Later they learned the police did go to the barn. They found no sign of stolen bikes, just an empty, decaying interior. No footprints, no fresh clues. The policeman told them the building was unsafe, advising everyone to stay away. That night, the kids felt unsettled, as though the barn's secret remained hidden. As the weekend approached, the 3 friends tried to focus on normal kid stuff. Games, visits to each other's houses, maybe a movie. But in the back of their minds, they sensed their story with the barn wasn't fully over. Some nights, Mia dreamed of that loft, while thunder rattled her window. And she'd wake, heart pounding, certain that a shadow lingered just outside her door. One cloudy afternoon about a week later, an unexpected message reached Mia's phone. An unknown number texted her. It read, "If you want your bikes back, come alone to the barn at dusk." Mia's eyes went wide. She showed it to Ben and Carlos right away. They gathered at Mia's kitchen table, anxious. Who has her phone number? Ben wondered. Mia felt goosebumps. She was sure only family and close friends had her number. Carlos read the text again. This must be a prank. Or maybe someone wants to trick us. Mia's mom was busy in the other room, so the kids talked in hushed tones. Should we tell our parents? Ben asked. But Carlos feared the grown-ups would ban them from even stepping outside. Mia said, but we can't just go. That barn is dangerous. At last they agreed to do something safer, show the text to the police. So they walked to the small police station after school. The desk officer recognized them from the bike theft report. They handed over Mia's phone, explaining the text. The officer frowned. This is suspicious. You children must not go near that place again. We'll check the phone details. He asked them if they recognized the number. They shook their heads. The officer said they'd track it if possible. The kids left the station feeling uneasy. Who had their bikes and why lure them to the barn? That night, Mia couldn't sleep, imagining some figure in the barn typing messages on an old phone. The next day, the officer called Mia's parents, saying the number was untraceable, likely a burner phone. Please stay away from the barn, he warned. Carlos and Ben urged Mia to remain calm. The bikes might be gone forever, Ben said sadly. We can't risk our lives for them. Mia agreed, but she felt a twist of anger. She wanted answers. Yet fear held her back. A few days passed without more texts. The children tried to bury their worries. Then a second message arrived on Mia's phone late one evening. Your precious bikes can be found where you first looked. Dare to come? The barn, obviously. Mia read the text at breakfast. Her hands shook. She told Carlos and Ben, who turned pale. They decided not to reply. The policeman said ignoring was best to avoid encouraging the sender. So they carried on, hearts uneasy. In class, a friend teased them about hearing more ghost stories. Mia forced a laugh, but inside, tension bubbled. She glanced at her phone often. No more new messages that day. That weekend, the kids stayed close to home. They felt safer with family around. Mia's phone remained silent, which was both a relief and a worry. Something or someone wanted them back at the barn. But they had no intention of returning. Or so they hoped. Night fell and a storm rolled in. Thunder boomed again, making Mia recall that dreadful walk. She turned off her light, pulling the blankets over her head. If only the barn story would vanish like a bad dream. But in her chest, she sensed the barn's hidden secrets might call to them once more. A quiet spell followed for 2 weeks. No new texts, no sightings of shadows, no reason to approach the barn. The kids began to relax. Carlos's dad promised to buy him a new bike soon. Mia borrowed her mom's old bike. Ben got a second-hand one from an uncle. Life seemed to inch back to normal. One early morning, the three friends rode around Pine Grove, enjoying the fresh air. The sun was bright, birds chirped, and everything felt peaceful. They stopped by a small pond to feed ducks, laughing at how greedy the ducks were. Suddenly, Ben's phone buzzed. He rarely got messages, so he checked it with curiosity. His face went pale. It's from that unknown number, he said in a tight voice. The text said, "We know you're ignoring us. We'll bring your bikes to your door if you do one favor. Come to the barn and see." Chills ran through them. How does this person have your number now? Mia gasped. Ben swallowed. I have no idea. Carlos frowned, punching the air in frustration. This is getting scary. Let's show the police again. They hurried to the police station, finding the same desk officer. He read the text, eyebrows furrowed. Someone's playing a mean trick. We'll do what we can, but we can't post an officer at your house 24/7. Keep your phones close. Report any suspicious person near your home. Back home, Mia's parents scolded her for not telling them immediately. They warned her to never respond to those messages. She agreed, fear knotting in her stomach. Carlos's family gave him a lecture too, though he had done nothing wrong. The kids felt powerless. That evening, Mia peered out her window, half expecting to see a shadowy figure sneaking around. But the street looked quiet, just a neighbor's dog barking at the moon. She tried to calm her heartbeat. Days passed. The text stopped again, but tension lingered. The kids stuck together at recess, only half paying attention to normal activities. They avoided the old road that led to the barn. Rumors around town faded, though. People moved on, focusing on other news. Then, on a Saturday night, a new text arrived on Ben's phone. Time is running out. The barn waits. No mention of bikes. Just that haunting line. Ben almost dropped his phone. He showed it to Mia and Carlos first thing Sunday morning. They gathered on Mia's porch, voices hushed. Could it be a trick by older kids at school? Carlos asked. Mia shrugged, too scared to guess. The barn's existence weighed on them like a dark cloud. They decided to do the only thing that made sense, tell the policeman again. But before they could get there, an unexpected twist occurred. Carlos's dad stepped out, saying he found something leaning against their fence early that morning. Carlos's missing bike. It had fresh scratches as if dragged through rough ground. A note was taped to the handlebar. 1 down, 2 to go. The barn holds the rest. The kids' hearts lurched. This message was specifically aimed at Mia's and Ben's bikes. The puzzle deepened, pulling them closer to confronting the barn once more. News of the mysterious bike return spread among the 3 families. Fear tinged their relief. Who had placed the bike by the fence? Why lure them to the barn? The policeman studied the note. He promised to watch Carlos's neighborhood at night, hoping to catch the culprit. Carlos felt both excited and uneasy seeing his old bike again. It was scuffed, the tires half flat. He thanked his dad, but that note gave him chills. Mia and Ben worried about their own bikes, sure some plan was brewing. The policeman asked them all to stay calm and vigilant. Days slipped by. The barn remained off limits, yet the invitation to come lingered in their minds. Each night, Mia triple-locked her doors. Carlos peered out his window at bedtime. Ben slept with a small flashlight under his pillow. Tension grew. One afternoon after school they met at the park. Mia suggested they do something bold, like set a trap. If they want us at the barn, we can get the police to stake it out, she said. Carlos and Ben considered it. But how? The policeman wasn't likely to hide in an old barn with them. Ben had another idea. What if we quietly go near the barn, watch from a distance, and see who shows up? Mia bit her lip. That sounded dangerous. But curiosity and a desire to end this once and for all tugged at them. They talked it over, each uncertain. Eventually they agreed on a safer approach. They'd asked the policeman to check the barn at night with them waiting in the car outside. However, when they explained this plan to the policeman, he seemed doubtful. We don't have the manpower for a nighttime sting on a rumored spook, he said with a sympathetic shrug. He did promise to drive by occasionally. Left on their own, the kids felt cornered by the creepy messages. The next text popped up 2 days later on Mia's phone. Tomorrow. Dusk. Barn. Your bike waits. Mia showed it to Carlos and Ben, eyes wide. They didn't want to go, but if they didn't, the messages might never stop. They decided to keep it secret. No parents, no policemen, just them. They'd be quick. Step onto the barn property at dusk, look for the bikes, then run if anything strange happened. The barn used to be just a dark old building, right? They had faced it once. Could they do it again? Fear gripped them, but they hated the sense of being hunted. On the chosen day, they packed flashlights, wore sturdy shoes, and met near the old road. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. Mia felt her stomach twist. We do this fast, she whispered. Get the bikes and leave. Carlos and Ben nodded, each swallowing hard. They pedaled Carlos's newly returned bike, he carried Ben on the back, while Mia used a spare bike from home. They moved carefully along the same dusty path they once took. Dark clouds gathered overhead. A quiet wind teased them with distant barn memories. Each heart pounded as the dreaded barn came into view. They arrived at the big tree near the barn. The sun's last rays turned the sky crimson. The barn loomed, half in shadows. Mia, Carlos, and Ben dismounted. The place was silent, the tall grass still. No sign of their missing bikes. Ben's voice shook. Let's check behind the barn first, or maybe the side. We can keep distance from the door. The others agreed. They circled around, hearts hammering. The weeds rustled underfoot, and a crow cawed in a nearby field, making them jump. They spotted nothing behind the barn but the rotting fence and tangled weeds. The back door, which they escaped through before, remained slightly ajar. Carlos whispered, "No bikes here. Should we peek inside?" Fear tugged at them, but they had come this far. Mia swallowed. She took out her flashlight, flicking it on. The memory of shadowy corners haunted her. They tiptoed through the parted door, the smell of musty hay filling their noses. The interior looked the same. Dusty floor, old crates, and looming darkness. A flicker of movement near the far corner made them freeze. Mia shone her light, only a piece of cloth hanging from a broken hook, swaying in a breeze. They stepped further, scanning for bikes. The hush felt unnatural, like the barn itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, a scraping sound broke the silence. They spun around. Something slid across the floor in the main area, near the front door. A moment later, a dim figure emerged from behind a stall. Mia's flashlight wavered, revealing a tall, thin silhouette. Ben gasped, nearly dropping his flashlight. Carlos clenched his fists. Mia tried to ask, Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Then it gestured to the side where two bikes lay on the ground, bikes that looked like Mia's and Ben's. Relief and horror collided in their minds. They wanted their bikes, but who was this? The figure stepped into a sliver of moonlight. It was an older man with sunken cheeks, wearing dark, ragged clothes. His eyes gleamed strangely. He spoke in a low hiss, "You came good." Mia's blood ran cold. "Why did you take our bikes?" she managed. He lifted a finger to his lips as if telling them to be quiet. The barn door slammed behind them. The kids jumped. The man let out a raspy laugh. "This barn has secrets," he said, voice echoing. "I only wanted new visitors. You showed such curiosity before." Carlos demanded, "What do you want?" Fear bubbled in his chest. The man smirked. "The same that all hungry shadows want, a presence to feed on. Your fear, your confusion. The barn thrives on it." Mia's flashlight flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. She saw the man's face twist in an unnatural grin. Ben pulled on her sleeve, trembling. The sense of doom hung thick. They realized this wasn't just about bikes. Something darker was at play. Lightning flashed outside the barn window, revealing the man's gaunt features more clearly. The kids wondered if they had walked into a trap. The man stepped closer, leaving them no easy path to the door. A chill settled in the air. The barn seemed to pulse with silent menace, as if it truly fed on their fear. In a surge of courage, Carlos lunged for Ben's and Mia's bikes, hoping to drag them away. The strange man hissed, stepping forward. Mia shouted, "Stay back." She swung the flashlight beam at him, but he shielded his eyes. Ben tried to help Carlos, grabbing a bike handle. The man snarled, "You can't just leave." Mia's mind raced. She spotted an old pitchfork propped against the wall. She darted to snatch it, brandishing it like a spear. "Move!" she barked at the man, surprising even herself with her boldness. The man's grin vanished, replaced by a scowl. "Foolish children," he spat. Lightning flickered outside again, revealing the barn in a bright flash. The figure cast a tall shadow behind him. For a moment, Mia thought that shadow looked like it moved on its own, twisting. Then darkness returned and the man lunged, trying to grab the pitchfork. Mia yanked it back. Ben and Carlos struggled to pull the bikes toward the back door. The man roared, "You must feed the barn." His voice echoed like a mad whisper. Fear pounded in their ears, but they refused to freeze. They had faced the barn's gloom once before. They wouldn't bow to it now. Mia thrust the pitchfork forward, not hitting the man but keeping him at bay. "Stay away from us," she said, voice trembling but steady. He snarled again, swiping at the air. She noticed his nails were long and dirty like claws. Another flash of lightning lit his angry face. Carlos managed to yank the bikes free from the debris. "Ben, come on," he yelled. Ben took hold of one handlebar, chest tight with fear. The back door was just a few yards away. The man tried to move around Mia, but she sidestepped, blocking him. "Go," she told her friends. "I'll hold him off." Carlos and Ben bolted toward the back door with the bikes. Mia inched backward, pitchfork raised. The man fumed, eyes burning with some twisted rage. "This barn is hungry," he growled. "You can't escape its hold." Mia's pulse thundered in her ears. She remembered the weird carving in her backpack, the shadows in the loft. She refused to let the barn take them. Summoning her courage, she swung the pitchfork in a wide arc, forcing him to jump back. Then she spun and dashed after her friends. The back door felt stuck again, but with a swift kick from Ben, it flew open. Rain poured from the night sky, thunder grumbling in the distance. They shoved the bikes through and Mia slipped out last, gripping the pitchfork. The man lunged at the opening, but Mia slammed the door in his face. A muffled shout echoed from inside. Outside in the weeds, the three kids wasted no time. They hopped on their bikes. Mia tossed the pitchfork aside and pedaled hard, ignoring the mud splashing her legs. Lightning flashed, revealing the barn's back wall once more. A figure pounded on the door from within, but they didn't look back. They sped away into the dark farmland, hearts bursting with fear and relief. Their bodies shivered from cold rain and raw adrenaline. The barn's silhouette faded behind them, a menacing shape under the stormy sky. They had their bikes, but also a terrifying new memory they'd never forget. The three friends pedaled furiously, the storm-lashed night making it hard to see. Rain stung their faces and thunder shook the air. but they refused to slow down. Their bikes swerved around puddles and bumps in the dirt road. Mia led, scanning for any sign of the main highway. Carlos nearly slid off the road at one point, mud clogging his tires. Ben shouted for him to be careful. They were soaked to the bone, hearts pounding from fear of the barn. Mia kept glancing back to ensure the strange man wasn't chasing them. In the flicker of lightning, she saw only empty fields. Eventually, the road curved, and they recognized the same signpost reading Pine Grove, 3 miles. Relief swelled in them. Their legs ached, but they pressed on, determined to get home. The distant glow of town lights came into view. Each child silently prayed to reach safety soon. When they finally entered Pine Grove's outskirts, they slowed, panting. The street lamps cast comforting circles of light on the pavement. They rode through empty streets, passing quiet houses. It was near midnight, most people asleep. They agreed to go first to Mia's house as it was the closest. Within minutes, they rolled into her driveway, water dripping from their clothes. Mia's front porch light flickered on as they approached. Her mother flung open the door, gasping at their drenched appearance. "What happened?" she cried, worried and angry. Mia, Carlos, and Ben stumbled inside, adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. They tried to explain in hurried voices. The barn, the missing bikes, the strange man, how they escaped. Mia's mom listened, eyes wide with shock. She called the policeman again, demanding he come right away. Soon, the policeman arrived, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He took notes, shaking his head in disbelief. "You kids could have been hurt," he scolded, but also seemed worried about the mention of a violent stranger. "We'll send officers to check," he said. "But promise me no more investigating that place on your own." The kids nodded, tears mixing with rain on their cheeks. Mia's mother made them hot cocoa, wrapping them in blankets. They sat on the sofa, trembling. The policeman radioed for backup, instructing a patrol car to drive out. Then he turned to them, voice gentler. "I'm glad you're safe. We'll handle it now." Exhaustion weighed heavily on the 3 friends. They barely sipped the cocoa, their eyes half-lidded. Mia's mother said they could stay the night. Carlos and Ben could crash on living room couches. She didn't want them riding home in the storm anyway. They nodded gratefully, too tired to move. While the policeman headed back into the rain, the kids dozed off. Mia's mom watched over them, worry etched on her face. She thought about the barn's terror, the scratched backpack, the phone messages. The policeman might find some clue or arrest that strange man. At least she hoped. Lightning flashed outside, revealing the suburban street. No more farmland, no more barn. For now, the children could rest in a warm house. But an uneasy question lingered. Would the man truly give up, or did the barn's haunted secret have more power than they realized? Morning came with softer skies, the storm gone. Mia, Carlos, and Ben woke to the smell of pancakes and coffee. Mia's mother greeted them with relief. She had called their parents, explaining the situation. Everyone was thankful the kids were safe, but upset they'd risked their lives again. The policeman returned, knocking at the door around mid-morning. He sat in the living room with the kids, saying, "We sent 2 officers out to the barn last night. They found no man, just an empty building. They searched inside and out, but no sign of him. We're still investigating. Could be a drifter. Could be something else." Carlos felt frustrated. "But we saw him. He threatened us." The policeman nodded seriously. "I believe you. We just can't find him right now." He advised them to stay away from that area, urging parents to keep them supervised. Mia's mom agreed wholeheartedly. That afternoon, the kids parted ways. Ben's mom picked him up, tears of relief in her eyes. Carlos's dad arrived soon after, hugging him tightly. Mia stayed home, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. The barn's dark power, or that man's twisted plan, still loomed in her mind. Days turned into weeks. No more texts arrived. The policeman occasionally checked in with Mia's family, but found no leads on the barn occupant. Some neighbors gossiped that the barn was indeed haunted by a crazy caretaker or spirit. Others dismissed it as nonsense. One bright Saturday, the children met at the park. They spoke in low tones about how they felt safer now but still rattled. Mia said, "At least we have our bikes again." She patted the handle of her old bike, now scratched but functional. Ben nodded. "I dream about that man's eyes sometimes." Carlos shuddered, recalling the final confrontation. They decided to make a promise. Never explore the barn again, no matter what. They wouldn't let their curiosity or any strange text lure them back. They had learned a hard lesson. The policeman had told them the property owner might board the place up, hopefully preventing more incidents. Life gradually returned to normal. School kept them busy with homework and sports. Their parents relaxed the strict rules once it seemed the threat was gone. The barn legend faded among their classmates. Still, Mia often dreamt of flickering shadows in her sleep and woke sweaty. She never told anyone except Ben, who had similar nightmares. One quiet evening, Mia rode her bike around the neighborhood with her mom's permission, staying on familiar streets. The sky glowed orange with sunset. She felt a pang of fear when the wind rustled the trees, reminding her of the barn's dark corners. But she breathed in, recalling the policeman's words, "We got this." Back home, her family ate dinner, chatted about normal daily things. Mia realized how good it felt to do ordinary tasks without worrying about shadows. She glanced at her phone, half expecting another message. None came. She set it aside, trying to move on from the memory. Yet deep within her, she knew the barn story would always haunt them a bit. They survived something dangerous, met a mysterious figure who thrived on fear. Now, though, they were determined to live free from that dark spell. Months passed without further incidents. The old barn remained boarded up by its absentee owner, at the police's recommendation. Local tales continued to swirl, but the kids kept their distance. They focused on enjoying normal life, playing in the park, riding bikes around safe streets, and studying for school exams. One summer weekend, Mia's parents invited Ben and Carlos to a backyard barbecue. The three friends laughed as they flipped burgers with Mia's dad, joked about silly things, and forgot the barn's gloom for a while. After lunch, they sipped lemonade on the porch, reflecting on how much had changed since that stormy night. Carlos said, "It feels good to be normal kids again. No weird texts, no creepy barns." Ben nodded in agreement. Mia smiled softly, though she sometimes thought about the man's shadowy grin. She guessed he might have left town or was still hiding. But if he never bothered them again, she was fine with not knowing. As dusk fell that evening, they sat around a small fire pit in Mia's backyard, roasting marshmallows. Firelight flickered on their faces, reminding them a little of the barn's creepy darkness. But this fire was friendly and safe, surrounded by parents' laughter and good smells from the grill. They toasted marshmallows, their hearts light. Mia's mom came over, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so proud of you all. You've been through a lot." The kids nodded, remembering the fear but also the strength they found in each other. The conversation turned to future plans, maybe a short trip to a local lake or a camping outing with parents. They joked about how they'd make sure it wasn't near any haunted barns. The next day, the policeman paid one final visit to say the case was closed, no further leads. They never found the suspicious man, but no more sightings or texts occurred. The policeman told them to call if anything strange happened, and they promised they would. On the last week of summer vacation, the kids decided to hold a trash the past ceremony. They tore up the old text messages printed on paper, cast them into a small metal bin. They said goodbye to the nightmares, the barn's ghostly echoes, and the missing bike's fiasco. Mia set a match to the paper and it curled into ash. This felt like a final release, a way to let go. School reopened, a new grade began. Mia, Carlos, and Ben found themselves smiling more, playing in the sunshine without glancing over their shoulders. They still had occasional goosebumps when passing lonely roads, but that was normal caution. The memory of the barn stayed locked away, a lesson in curiosity gone wrong. Sometimes, on rainy nights, they might recall the hush of the loft or the flicker of a shadow. But they had each other, stronger than any old curse. In the heart of Pine Grove, life returned to gentle routines. And in a field far outside town, that barn stood silent, boarded up, left to the wind and the crows, its secret sealed for now. In the seaside town of Shallow Cape, three friends, Ethan, Mira, and Scott, arrived for a week-long vacation with Ethan's family. Shallow Cape was known for its tall lighthouse perched on a rocky cliff by the ocean. Thick fog often rolled in, making the lighthouse's beam crucial for ships at night. Locals whispered about spooky occurrences around that old tower, strange lights and eerie calls carried on the wind. Ethan was eager to explore the rocky shoreline. He was a bold, curious kid who loved hearing scary tales. Mira was quieter, preferring to stick close to safe paths, but she enjoyed discovering new places. Scott, tall and a bit clumsy, tried to act brave, though ghost stories gave him chills. They stayed in a small rental cottage near the beach, with a clear view of the lighthouse in the distance. On their first afternoon, fog crept inland, dimming the sun early. Ethan, Mira, and Scott walked along the sandy beach, collecting shells. A fisherman passed by, warning them not to stray near the lighthouse after dark. "Some nights, the light goes out for no reason," he said, voice low. "Folks who investigate sometimes vanish for hours, returning confused." The kids exchanged uneasy glances but laughed it off as a local legend. After dinner, they watched from their cottage window. The lighthouse beams swept across the fog, slicing through the gray air. Ethan felt a twinge of excitement. "Let's check it out tomorrow," he suggested. Mira bit her lip. The fisherman said it's risky. Scott shrugged, half spooked but curious. The three decided they could at least see it from a distance in daylight. Night fell and the fog thickened. Ethan lay awake, listening to the distant rumble of ocean waves. The beam from the lighthouse flickered through the window, lighting the fog every few seconds. He thought he heard a faint horn like a warning to ships, but maybe he was half dreaming. He eventually dozed off, images of swirling mist and a towering lighthouse drifting in his mind. Morning arrived with a slight drizzle. The trio convinced Ethan's mom they'd stay close to the shore. She granted permission, cautioning them to be safe and stay away from slippery rocks. They promised, grabbing jackets and heading out. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. Gulls cawed overhead, circling the harbor. They walked along the curve of the bay, stepping around seaweed clumps. The lighthouse rose ahead, tall and gray, perched on a rocky outcrop. Waves crashed below it, sending spray into the air. The kids noticed a narrow path that zigzagged up to the lighthouse's base. A chain hung across the entrance with a sign reading, "Keep out, unsafe." Scott peered up at the looming tower. A few windows dotted its side, and near the top sat the lantern room, its glass panels shining faintly in the fog. "It doesn't look so scary," he said with forced confidence. Mira wasn't so sure. The structure felt heavy with mystery, especially in this gray weather. Ethan felt his heart beat faster. He recalled the fisherman's warning. The light sometimes died and people heard odd calls in the mist. Still, his curiosity flared. He took a step toward the path, his friends close behind, not knowing the chilling secrets that lay within the lighthouse's ancient walls. Standing before the keep-out chain, Ethan studied the path winding upward. It looked steep and a bit cracked. Mira noticed damp moss growing on the rocks. She said, "This sign means it might be dangerous." Scott nodded, uncertain. But Ethan found the gate wide open, no lock in sight. "We'll just take a peek," he insisted, placing a hand on the chain. They ducked under it carefully. The path was narrow, lined with jagged rocks. Seagulls squawked overhead as if scolding them. The fog lifted slightly, letting them see the tower's stone walls more clearly. Patches of the lighthouse looked chipped, with salt-stained bricks. A single rusty door sat at the tower's base, partially ajar. Up close, the lighthouse seemed bigger. Waves crashed against the cliff below, making the ground vibrate. Mira felt a swirl of nerves. "Maybe we should see if there's a caretaker," she whispered. Usually, a lighthouse had a keeper or staff, but this place felt deserted. The rust on the door suggested nobody had entered for a while. Scott pointed to a small plaque near the entrance. It read, "Shallow Cape Lighthouse, built 1887. Beneath, a second line stated, "In memory of those lost at sea." Lily's throat tightened. Something about that phrase gave her goosebumps, imagining souls wandering the fog. Ethan gently pushed the door. It opened with a creak, revealing a dim corridor. They peeked inside, discovering a short hallway with stone walls and a spiral staircase leading upward. A damp, musty smell wafted out. Jonah half expected to see cobwebs everywhere, but the floor seemed somewhat clear, just damp with sea moisture. "Hello?" Ethan called. His voice echoed, no reply. The kids glanced at each other. "If it's empty, maybe we can climb the stairs," Ethan proposed. Myra's fear mingled with excitement. "But the fisherman's warning," she began. Scott cut in, "We'll be quick. Just a look from the top, then we go." Despite the uneasy feeling, they agreed. This was their chance for an adventure, hopefully not a dangerous one. They slipped inside, the door banging shut behind them. The corridor's gloom surrounded them. Mira switched on her small flashlight, shining it on the curved wall. Tiny shells and pieces of coral stuck in the stone, a reminder of how old this place was. Drips of water ran down the cracks. Moving to the staircase, they felt the chill of damp air. The steps were steep and narrow, the iron railing rusty. Each child grabbed the railing for support as they started climbing. The spiral made them dizzy after a few turns, and the only light was Myra's flashlight beam plus some haze from the top, where the lens room might be. Partway up, Ethan paused. He thought he heard a faint hum, like someone humming a sad melody. He motioned for silence. They listened, hearts pounding. Another drip of water fell from the ceiling, echoing. Then the hum vanished. Scott whispered, "Must be the wind." They kept climbing, uncertain. The hush grew thick around them, as though the tower's stones absorbed every sound. Reaching a landing, they saw a closed wooden door. A sign reading "Keeper's Room" hung crooked. The hum returned, now louder, definitely a voice. The kids felt fear rising. Something inside that room or further up was making the noise. They realized this might be more than just an old building. The fishermen's warnings echoed in their minds, but curiosity kept them from turning back. Huddled by the door labeled "Keeper's Room," the kids debated whether to open it. The eerie humming continued, faint but steady. Myra's hands shook. "What if someone's living here?" she whispered. Ethan tried to stay brave. "We can knock." He raised his fist to tap lightly. Knock, knock. The humming stopped abruptly. They held their breath, waiting. No response. Jonah gulped, twisting the knob. It turned, but the door felt stuck. He gave it a gentle push and it creaked open an inch. The musty smell intensified. A flicker of movement caught Ethan's eye through the gap. He froze. "I think I saw something," he said in a hushed voice. Myra's pulse sped up. She aimed her flashlight inside. The tiny beam revealed a cluttered room. Old chairs, a desk piled with papers and a bed in the corner. The bed sheets hung in tatters. Shadows danced along the walls. No sign of a person though. The corner looked especially dark. Jonah whispered, "Hello?" Silence. Lily gently pushed the door wider. It groaned, the hinges squeaking. They stepped in carefully, scanning around. The humming did not return. Could it have been their imaginations? Jonah spotted a dusty journal on the desk. He flipped it open, coughing as dust rose. The pages had smudged handwriting about weather logs and shipping records. The last entries were scribbled lines, words like "fog thick," "unusual voices," "must keep watch." Then it stopped mid-sentence. Meanwhile, Lily approached the bed. She saw a single boot lying on the floor, seaweed clinging to it. Next to the bed lay a small chest with a cracked lid. She knelt, prying it open. Inside were rusted keys, a tangle of fishing nets, and a photograph of a stern-faced man in a lighthouse keeper's uniform. Ethan hovered near the corner, noticing a large water stain on the wall, shaped like a person. It sent shivers up his spine. He decided to check the closet door, but it was locked. He tried the rusted keys from the chest, no luck. Suddenly, footsteps sounded above them, making the ceiling creak. All three froze. "Someone's upstairs," Lily hissed. The kids exchanged terrified looks. Possibly another caretaker? Or something else? The overhead steps moved slowly, pacing back and forth. Then the humming resumed, drifting down from above. The children realized they had to continue up the spiral stairs if they wanted to see who or what was there. Backing out felt just as scary. Would they pass the occupant on their way out? They decided to quietly slip out of the keeper's room, leaving it as they found it. Heartbeats thudding, they tiptoed back to the stairwell. The footsteps above paused. Ethan mouthed, "Stay silent," as they resumed climbing, each step feeling heavier. The next level likely led to the lens room, the place where the lighthouse's light beamed out to sea. If the occupant was there, they were about to meet face to face in the lonely top of this ancient tower. Ascending the final spiral, the children heard the humming grow clearer. It no longer sounded like just a breeze. It was a low melody, sad and continuous. The tower's walls felt cold to the touch. Jonah's mind raced, half wanting to turn around, half compelled to find answers. At last, they reached a small metal door labeled "Lantern Room." The humming was just on the other side. Ava's stomach churned, but she mustered courage and nudged the door. It swung open, revealing a circular room with glass windows all around. The giant lens sat in the center, used for sending a bright beam across the sea at night. But the lens was quiet, no gear turning. In the dim daylight, the children saw an old figure standing at the far side, facing a broken console. His back was turned, shoulders hunched, wearing a soaked keeper's jacket. Water dripped from his sleeves as if he'd been in the ocean. The humming came from him. Lily raised her flashlight, uncertain. "Hello," she said softly. The figure stiffened. Slowly he turned. They saw a pale, gaunt face, eyes milky and distant. His lips quivered, continuing the eerie tune under his breath. The kids felt frozen with fear. The figure's expression held sorrow, not anger, but a deep sense of something not right. Jonah managed to speak. "Sir, are you okay? We came to see the lighthouse." The man's voice hissed, "Shouldn't have come here. No one comes. No one helps." He blinked watery eyes, stepping forward. They noticed seaweed clung to his legs and boots as if he rose from the depths. A cold draft swirled around, making the room's glass walls rattle. The man reached out a trembling hand. "The fog took me, the sea took me. I am bound to this light," he muttered. Lily's skin prickled. She guessed he might be a ghost or something half alive. the stench of salt and decay wafted around him. He turned to the lens, pressing a hand on it. "The light must stay on," he whispered, "or they will claim more souls in the waves." Then he looked directly at the children, eyes full of sadness. "Help me fix the light, or it's too late." The kids exchanged terrified glances. Part of them wanted to run, but the ghostly figure's plea felt urgent. Ava said, trembling, "How? We don't know anything about lighthouses." The man moved aside, revealing broken wires and a cracked switch panel. Water dripped from the controls, sparks flickering. The storm destroyed it. "The watchers left," he mumbled. Jonah realized the caretaker they read about might have died. This was his spirit, unable to rest. In the gloom they saw the thick fog swirling outside. The man hissed, "Ships are out there tonight. The rocks will tear them apart if the light stays off." Lily's heart clenched. She recalled the fishermen's warnings, how ships needed the beam. Maybe they had to do something. Though fear pounded in their chests, the kids nodded at each other. They'd fix the light if possible. The caretaker's sorrowful eyes gleamed with faint hope. He stepped back, letting them approach the console. They realized this was no ordinary puzzle, it was a task to prevent disaster. The real question: could they fix an ancient mechanism while a ghost hovered behind them? Gathered around the broken console, the children studied wires, knobs, and a rusted metal box. The ghostly keeper hovered near the lens, humming softly as if encouraging them. Ava's hands trembled. "We can't fix this," she murmured, scanning the tangled electronics. Jonah grimaced, poking at a fuse panel. Lily rummaged in her backpack, only finding a small multi-tool and some tape. The keeper whispered, "Power from below, cables lead down, must reconnect," pointing to a slot where cables hung loose. The kids realized they might need to return to the lower levels to find where the cables broke. Their hearts sank at the idea of wandering the tower again, but they had no choice if they wanted to help. Nodding in silent agreement, they told the keeper they'd go. He just kept humming, leaning against the lens. As they descended, the spiral steps felt colder, each echo magnified. Lily couldn't shake the image of the caretaker's pale face. Jonah tried to think logically: fix cables, restore power, get out. They reached a room marked Power Chamber, near the base, one they hadn't noticed before. The door was stuck, so they heaved together until it opened with a screech. Inside lay a small generator covered in dust and spiderwebs. Broken wires dangled from the ceiling. A toolbox sat in the corner, rusted but maybe useful. Ava used the flashlight to spot where two cables had snapped. The ends looked charred, possibly from a lightning strike or water damage. The generator had a big crack in its side. Jonah opened the toolbox, finding a few tools still usable. Lily's multi-tool had wire cutters. They decided to strip the broken cable ends and attempt to reconnect them. They worked anxiously, no real expertise but guided by common sense and a little trial and error. Sparks flew once when Jonah accidentally touched two wires, making them yelp. Lily tapped them apart with a screwdriver. Bit by bit, they twisted the wires together, wrapping them in tape to hold. Their hands shook, minds racing with the knowledge that a ship might be in danger out at sea. When they finally secured the cables, the generator stuttered. The overhead bulb flickered. The kids held their breath. After a moment, the dim bulb stayed lit. Jonah fiddled with the generator's switch, hearing a low rumble of power. "I think it's working," he said, breathless. They scrambled back upstairs to the lantern room. The caretaker had his back turned, staring out the window at the foggy ocean. The lens still looked dark. "It's fixed below," Ava panted. The caretaker slowly turned, watery eyes reflecting the half-dead wiring. He placed a pale hand on the main console. He pressed the switch gently and the machinery within the lens groaned. A spark flashed, then the big lamp inside the lens sputtered. Slowly, it glowed, forming a bright beam. The keeper sighed with relief, his humming growing calmer. A strong beam cut through the fog, sweeping the coastline. A sense of triumph washed over the kids. They'd done it. The caretaker closed his eyes as if at peace. His figure turned dimmer, transparent. "Thank you," he whispered, voice echoing. The kids watched in awe as he faded, dissolving into a swirl of mist. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the newly powered lamp. They stood there, hearts pounding. Lily wiped a tear, unsure if it was joy or fear. Jonah and Ava felt a strange calm. The ghost had found release, or so it seemed. But their part wasn't over. They still had to leave the lighthouse, hoping the light would stay shining, saving any ship that might pass in the night. With the lamp now shining steadily, the cousins realized dusk approached outside. Thick clouds rolled in, the ocean below turning dark and choppy. They gazed out the lantern room windows, watching waves crash against sharp rocks. "At least the light can warn ships now," Jonah said quietly. "But how would they get back safely?" The caretaker ghost vanished, leaving only the lingering hush. The kids felt the tower's weight, the walls echoing with every step. Maybe the presence that once haunted it had found peace, but the tower's emptiness still unsettled them. They carefully descended the spiral staircase, each rung squeaking underfoot. Lily asked if they should check the keeper's room again, but Ava and Jonah shook their heads. They had done enough. They wanted out. Down in the main hallway, the door leading outside looked rusted but not locked. As they pulled the door, it stuck momentarily, then opened with a jolt. A gust of salt-laden wind hit their faces. Outside, twilight had fallen, painting the sky in shades of purple. The beam from the lighthouse soared overhead, sweeping across the sea, a comforting glow. The kids stepped onto the rocky slope that led down to the path. The air felt chilly, but their hearts felt lighter. "We helped him," Lily murmured. Jonah agreed, "and we might have saved a ship." Ava nodded, though a small fear of the unknown still lingered inside her. She wondered if other ghosts might roam. Carefully, they navigated the path back to the beach, each wave roaring in the distance. No fisherman or caretaker appeared. The beach felt deserted, except for a single gull screeching overhead. Moonlight peeked through the clouds, giving just enough light to see by. Reaching the sand, they breathed deeply, relieved. The memories of the caretaker's sad eyes and the broken lamp replayed in their minds. The wind carried the faint smell of seaweed and wet stone. Jonah bent to pick up a smooth shell, perhaps as a token of this strange night. Once they reached the main bay where Aunt Rose's cottage was located, the warm glow of a porch light beckoned them. They walked faster, excited to share their story but also uncertain if adults would believe them. Aunt Rose's silhouette appeared on the porch, worry etched in her stance. She rushed to them, scolding but also hugging them fiercely. "What took you so long?" She had guessed they might explore that lighthouse. The kids admitted they did but claimed they only checked it briefly. Lily tried to explain the caretaker ghost, the broken lamp. Aunt Rose looked skeptical, then concerned. "At least you're safe," she sighed, guiding them inside. In the living room, they sat by the fireplace sipping hot cocoa. The children recounted the tale in hushed voices, seeing the caretaker, fixing the power, the lamp shining. Aunt Rose didn't doubt their sincerity, though it sounded unbelievable. She simply said, "Sometimes the sea holds secrets, and so do old lighthouses." Despite exhaustion, the kids felt a sense of calm triumph. They had braved the ghostly presence and done something good. As they climbed into bed that night, the lighthouse beam shone across the bay, bright and steady. They drifted off with a faint smile, imagining ships passing safely, guided by the newly awakened light. The next morning, bright sunshine bathed Shallow Cape, a welcome change from the gloomy weather. Ethan, Mira, and Scott woke feeling refreshed, though memories of the lighthouse adventure clung to them. Aunt Rose was relieved they'd returned safely, but she still frowned at their risky decision. They strolled into town for supplies, noticing some locals chatting about how the lighthouse beacon was shining more steadily than it had in years. A fisherman nodded at them, remarking, "Saw that old tower's light cut through the fog last night. Surprising, it's usually dim or flickers." The kids exchanged quick glances, hearts fluttering with secret pride. As they walked the harbor, Jonah, "Sorry, in the earlier stories it was Mira or Jonah. Let's keep consistent. Actually, for story 3 we have Ethan, Mira, and Scott. Let's maintain that. Apologies for confusion." Ethan pointed out a poster pinned to a post. It mentioned the Shallow Cape Lighthouse Preservation Society, run by a local historian named Miss Penfield. The flyer said the group needed volunteers to clean and restore the tower. Mira suggested they talk to Miss Penfield. Maybe she could confirm something about the caretaker's history. Curiosity guided them to a small building near the docks, labeled Historical Office. Inside, dusty shelves held old books and pictures. A kindly woman in glasses greeted them. She introduced herself as Miss Penfield. "How can I help you?" she asked with a smile. The kids explained they were curious about the lighthouse's past. Miss Penfield's eyes lit up. "Such a grand structure, but it's fallen into disrepair. We plan to fix it up. The caretaker years ago was rumored to have disappeared during a storm. People say his spirit still roams." The kids nodded, enthralled. Miss Penfield added, "We can't find official records of his final days. Some claim he drowned saving a fisherman, others that he vanished inside the tower. The beam often failed after his disappearance, leading to at least one shipwreck. But it's mostly rumors." Scott asked if the caretaker's name was known. Miss Penfield checked an old ledger. Ah yes. Harold Pierce, the last official keeper from 30 years ago. He always wore a thick keeper's jacket, even on hot days. Then one stormy night, gone. The kids recognized the name as possibly their ghost. Ethan hesitated, wanting to tell Miss Penfield about the ghost they saw, but he worried she'd think they were telling wild tales. Mira fidgeted, recalling the caretaker's watery form. Instead, they just thanked Miss Penfield and left. Outside, they discussed if they should share the full story. Scott believed Miss Penfield might be open-minded, but Ethan shrugged. We did what we had to so ships stay safe. The caretaker's spirit might rest now. Mira quietly agreed. They decided to keep it among themselves for now. They returned to the cottage, helping Aunt Rose with chores. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the lighthouse beam arc across the water. Aunt Rose joined them, handing out lemonade. The children felt a deeper respect for that tower. The caretaker, Harold Pierce, had found some peace. As night settled, they heard the faint foghorn. No eerie voice called from the sea. The wind carried only normal ocean sounds. Inside their hearts, they felt relief and a subtle bond with the ancient lighthouse. In a small way, they had become part of its legend, a story of fear, courage, and guiding light through the darkest storms. Days passed with calm weather and bright sunshine. The kids enjoyed simple pleasures, collecting shells on the beach, tasting clam chowder at a local cafe, and biking along the coastal road. The memory of the caretaker's ghost still lingered, but it felt less scary each day. Aunt Rose noticed they looked more relaxed. She smiled, glad they weren't haunted by nightmares. One afternoon, Ethan suggested they take a boat tour offered by a local fisherman, Mr. Clay. Mira and Scott thought it might be fun to see the lighthouse from the sea's perspective, so Aunt Rose agreed, paying for their tickets. They boarded Mr. Clay's small fishing boat, the Marlin, which puttered out of the harbor. The salty breeze felt refreshing. The ocean sparkled under the midday sun. Mr. Clay pointed out interesting spots, like a rocky island where seals often rested, though no seals appeared today. As they neared the lighthouse's cliff from the water, the kids saw how it towered over the waves. The beam wasn't lit in daytime, but the top structure shone in the sun. Mr. Clay commented, "Heard that old tower's light is working better recently. The preservation folks might do repairs soon." The kids just nodded, smiling secretly. Mira leaned over the boat's side, studying the swirling water below. She imagined how stormy it could get at night. Scott checked the horizon for any sign of whales or dolphins, but only a few seabirds soared overhead. Suddenly, the boat's engine sputtered. Mr. Clay frowned, tapping the controls. "Might be a small clog," he muttered. The engine died, leaving them adrift near the rocky cliff. Waves tugged the boat closer to the shore's jagged rocks. Mr. Clay hurried to fix the engine, rummaging in a toolbox. The kids felt a surge of anxiety, recalling the caretaker's warnings about ships and rocks. If they drifted too close, they could crash. Ethan gripped the side of the boat, scanning the steep cliffs. The tide pulled them gently, but it was enough to worry. Mira noticed how the wind picked up, dark clouds forming. Scott asked, voice wavering, "Do we have a radio or phone?" Mr. Clay nodded. "I have a radio, but the signal might be poor here." He tried calling the harbor. Static answered. The kids exchanged nervous glances. The boat bobbed, inching nearer to the craggy shoreline. Water splashed up, rocking them. Then, unexpectedly, the lighthouse beam flickered on, despite the afternoon gloom. Fog rolled in quickly, blotting out the sun. The kids saw the bright beam slash through the mist. "Why is it on now?" Mira asked, though relief soared in their chests. Even in daylight, a storm's fog might demand the light's use. Mr. Clay managed to restart the engine with a loud cough. The boat jerked forward, away from the dangerous rocks. The kids cheered quietly, tension unraveling. As they turned back toward the harbor, they marveled at the active lighthouse beam. Perhaps the caretaker's spirit or the newly fixed lamp sensed the shift in weather, saving another boat from trouble. Returning to the dock, the kids felt the swirl of relief and wonder. The caretaker's presence might still be around, guiding travelers away from the rocky doom. They silently thanked the ghostly figure again for that beam of light, shining strong even in daytime storms. A sense of respect and awe for the old tower settled in their hearts. One evening, the kids ate dinner at a local diner with Aunt Rose. Talk in the diner buzzed about the upcoming Shallow Cape Lighthouse celebration. The Preservation Society planned a special event to celebrate the tower's history and raise money for repairs. Aunt Rose turned to the kids, asking if they wanted to attend. They agreed, curious about how people honored such a spooky place. At the event, which took place a few days later, a small crowd gathered near the lighthouse grounds. Booths sold lighthouse-themed crafts, homemade pastries, and postcards featuring the tower's silhouette. A cheerful spirit filled the air, with children running around, oblivious to the ghostly rumors. Ethan, Mira, and Scott roamed the booths, munching on cupcakes. The sun hung low, turning the sky orange. In the distance, the ocean glistened. A small stage had been set up, where Miss Penfield stood to give a short speech. She spoke of the lighthouse's long past, how it guided ships through storms for over a century. When Miss Penfield mentioned the caretaker who vanished, the crowd listened intently. She said, "No one truly knows how he disappeared, but his dedication to protecting ships remains an inspiration." The kids shivered, thinking of Harold Pierce. Miss Penfield then thanked volunteers for helping keep the beam alive. The kids glanced at each other, a secret grin passing between them. Night fell, and the event concluded with a lighting demonstration. A caretaker apprentice wearing modern gear stepped inside the tower. Moments later, the lens glowed, sending a bright beam across the sea. Applause erupted. The kids clapped, though they knew the tower's real caretaker might still lurk in spirit form. As people left, the kids lingered near the lighthouse steps, remembering their night inside. The front door had a new lock, presumably installed by the Preservation Society. They felt a pang of relief that no one else would wander in unprepared. Aunt Rose joined them, placing a hand on Myra's shoulder. "Time to head home," she said softly. While returning to the cottage, they passed the fisherman from day one. He recognized them, nodding. "Guess the old tower's not so spooky now, eh? Jonah, we must maintain story number 3's name as Ethan. Sorry for the slip," Ethan smirked. "It's still special," he replied. The fisherman waved, heading off. That night, the children dreamed of foghorns and swirling lights, but the nightmares seemed gentler. They sensed the caretaker's sadness had lifted, replaced by the watchers of Shallow Cape who now cared for the tower. The next morning, Aunt Rose told them they'd be leaving soon. Their bus ride back home was scheduled in 2 days. The kids felt grateful for the time spent in Shallow Cape, as it had taught them about bravery, compassion, and the bonds between past and present. They spent their final days collecting seashells and riding bikes around town. Whenever the wind carried a faint whistle, they shared a smile, recalling how they helped a ghostly keeper finish his duty. At night, they watched the steady beacon cut the darkness over the water. The caretaker's sorrowful hum was gone, replaced by a silent promise of safety. Their last day in Shallow Cape dawned bright and cool. The kids packed their belongings in the cottage, reminiscing over their strange, unforgettable experience. Aunt Rose arranged a small farewell lunch. Afterward, they took one final walk along the beach. The lighthouse towered in the distance, shining even in midday. Maintenance must have changed its schedule to a continuous operation, or perhaps the caretaker's spirit still guided the lamp in secret. As they strolled the shore, Ethan picked up a smooth rock, tucking it in his pocket as a souvenir. Mira listened to the seagulls cry overhead, the waves gently lapping the sand. Scott wrote "Thanks Lighthouse" in the wet sand with a stick, watching the tide slowly erase it. Eventually, the time came to board the bus that would take them back to their normal lives. They stood at the bus station with Aunt Rose, hugging her goodbye. She reminded them to keep the lighthouse tale close but to always stay safe. The bus pulled up with a hiss and they climbed on, finding seats by a window. As the bus rumbled away from Shallow Cape, the kids pressed their faces to the glass, seeing the coastline and the lighthouse fade from view. The sky was clear, the sea calm. A sense of bittersweet calm washed over them. The caretaker's story had reached some resolution, and now they carried that memory forward. They chatted quietly, planning to keep in touch with Aunt Rose and watch for news of the Preservation Society's efforts. Mira said she might send a letter to Miss Penfield, asking about future events. Scott joked that next time, they'd ask the caretaker's permission before messing with any haunted structure. Ethan laughed, recalling how close they came to disaster. After hours on the road, the bus arrived in their hometown. Parents waited, relief shining on their faces. The children hopped off, hugging them. That night, they slept in their own beds, the city noises replacing the ocean's hush. But in the quiet moments, they could still picture the fog-wrapped tower and the ghostly caretaker humming in the lantern room. Over the following weeks, life slipped into its familiar rhythm: school, chores, weekend fun. The cousins talked online, exchanging jokes and stories. When the topic of the Shallow Cape caretaker arose, they felt a pang of nostalgia. They also felt proud, knowing they had helped fix that lighthouse lamp and in doing so, eased a wandering spirit's pain. One afternoon, a small package arrived from Aunt Rose. Inside, they found 3 postcards featuring the Shallow Cape Lighthouse, each with a short note. The light shines steady. The caretaker would be grateful. Miss you. The kids smiled, pinning them on their corkboards. And so, the story of the whispering lighthouse drew to a close. But the memory of nighttime courage, bright beams cutting through fog, and a lonely keeper's longing would stay with them, a reminder that sometimes, even the scariest places hold a purpose, protecting lives from storms, bridging the living and the lost, guiding all to a safe shore. In the small town of Everglade, 3 cousins named Ava, Jonah, and Lily arrived for a summer visit. The town was surrounded by thick woods with tall trees and winding trails. Locals called this area the Whispering Woods because people sometimes heard strange noises among the branches, soft murmurs that sounded almost like voices. Ava was the oldest, with curious eyes and a fearless spirit. Jonah was a year younger, often cracking jokes to hide his nervousness. Lily was the youngest, quiet but observant. They stayed at their Aunt Rose's house, a cozy old place with a wide porch and a backyard that sloped into the edge of the forest. On their first day, Aunt Rose warned them to stay close to the house. She said, "The Whispering Woods can be tricky. Paths twist around and folks say you might hear voices that lure you deeper." The cousins exchanged glances. Ava shrugged, suspecting it was just a local legend. Jonah laughed nervously. Lily gazed at the tall trees with a mix of excitement and worry. After lunch, they walked around the yard, noticing a rickety fence marking the boundary to the woods. A narrow gap in the fence led to a faint trail. Lily peered through the gap. The woods loomed dark and cool, even under the bright sun. Jonah teased, "Maybe I can hear those famous whispers already," but his grin looked forced. Ava suggested they should at least peek inside just a little. Jonah hesitated, remembering Aunt Rose's warning. Lily said softly, "Maybe tomorrow we can ask permission." They all agreed to be patient, deciding to explore Aunt Rose's yard instead. The day passed calmly, with them picking wildflowers and playing tag in the tall grass. That night, they gathered around dinner with Aunt Rose, who served warm stew. She told them more about the Whispering Woods, how some said a wandering spirit roamed among the trees, calling names in a soft voice. Others reported glimpses of pale figures drifting between trunks. Ava found these stories thrilling, while Lily shivered a bit and Jonah tried to act brave. Aunt Rose ended by saying she'd lost her cat once in those woods for 2 days, until it returned, spooked and jumpy. She leaned over the table. "You can go near the fence in daylight, but please don't wander inside without an adult," she insisted. The cousins nodded seriously. After dinner, they curled up in the living room. The evening breeze blew through the open windows. Crickets chirped outside and the tall pine trees swayed gently. Ava flipped through a local magazine about Everglade. She saw a short article mentioning the woods had old legends of ghosts from pioneer times. Jonah tried to laugh it off, but Lily felt uneasy. Before bed, they stood on the porch, staring at the dark silhouette of the forest. Ava whispered, "Imagine hearing whispers right now." Jonah swallowed. Lily grabbed her cousin's hands, feeling a chill. They went inside, the echoes of Aunt Rose's words lingering in their heads. Tomorrow they planned to keep exploring carefully. But deep down, they sensed the Whispering Woods might hold secrets they couldn't ignore. Morning came with bright sunshine, making the woods look less intimidating. After breakfast, Ava asked Aunt Rose if they could explore the forest trail. Aunt Rose hesitated, then said, "Stay together and don't go far. If you hear or see anything strange, come right back." The cousins agreed. Armed with a small backpack of snacks and water, they set off to the fence gap. Jonah led the way, stepping onto the narrow path that wound between tall trees. Pine needles carpeted the ground, muffling their footsteps. Lily gazed up at the canopy, where sunlight trickled down in gold streaks. At first, everything felt normal. Birds chirped, squirrels darted among branches. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Ava hummed, finding it peaceful. Jonah joked, "Where are the spooky whispers, huh?" Lily giggled. They walked deeper, noticing the trail split now and then. After about 10 minutes, the path curved around a mossy rock. Ava pointed to scratch marks on a tree trunk. Could be from an animal. Jonah snapped a photo with his phone, thinking it looked cool. Lily carefully noted some strange, twisted roots poking from the ground. They reached a small clearing with wildflowers. It looked like a perfect picnic spot. The trio sat on a fallen log, munching on peanut butter sandwiches. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Suddenly, Lily stiffened. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Ava and Jonah paused, listening. A faint sigh-like sound drifted through the trees. It was barely audible, almost like a gentle "oh" carried on the wind. Jonah brushed it off as the breeze, but Lily insisted it felt like a whisper. Ava cocked her head, not sure. The breeze came again, producing a low murmur. They decided to keep going, curiosity pushing them. But they stayed alert. As they moved along the trail, Jonah remarked that the forest grew denser, the light dimmer. They didn't see many birds or squirrels now. The quiet felt heavy. A short while later they spotted an old wooden sign leaning against a tree. River Bend, 1 mile. The arrow pointed left. A river? That might be neat to see, Ava said. They turned that way, stepping over logs and ducking under low branches. The path got trickier with tangled roots. Lily almost tripped, but Jonah caught her. They saw footprints in the soft dirt, maybe hikers from weeks ago. No fresh prints though. The whispering sound seemed to fade, replaced by the hush of thick woods. Jonah asked, "What if we hear voices calling our names?" Lily frowned, not wanting to imagine it. Ava told him to cut the jokes. The tension had them glancing around more often. The sun was still up, but the thick canopy made them feel it might be late afternoon already. They reached a bend where the path split again, one side leading downhill. A sign read River Bend again, but was half broken. The cousins paused, noticing how the air felt cooler. Jonah said, "Let's just see the river and go back, okay?" Ava and Lily agreed, though Lily's stomach fluttered with unease. Something about these woods felt watchful, as if the trees were listening to their every step. The path descending toward the river turned slippery with wet leaves. Ava held onto a small branch for balance. Jonah joked about making skis, but Lily just shook her head, too focused on not falling. Below, they heard faint water sounds like a gentle stream. Soon, the path opened onto a narrow riverbank. The water trickled by, clear enough to see small fish darting under the surface. Sunlight glinted on the ripples. "This is pretty," Lily murmured. Ava knelt to dip her hand in the water. Jonah stood on a flat rock, gazing around. He spotted something odd near the bank, a cluster of stones arranged in a circle. Each stone had a symbol scratched into it, like runes or strange letters. Jonah called out, "Guys, look at these rocks." The cousins gathered around, feeling a sense of mystery. Ava picked one up. The symbol looked like a spiral with lines branching from it. "Could be old carvings," she guessed. Lily touched another stone, noticing a small handprint shape etched next to the symbol. The circle of rocks made them shiver slightly, as if it meant something more than just random art. They heard a soft rustling among the trees. All three glanced up. A gust of wind, or was it something else? The whispering sound from earlier returned, this time blending with the gentle flow of water. Lily stepped closer to Jonah, her eyes wide. "It's like the wind is talking." A sudden plop in the river startled them. They turned, seeing only ripples. Maybe a fish jumped or a rock fell. The hush returned. Jonah joked half-heartedly, "Maybe the fish are playing tricks." But nobody laughed. The woods felt heavier even though the sun still shone. Ava decided to break the tension. She said, "Let's take some photos of these rocks, then head back." She pulled out her phone, snapping pictures of the stone circle and the weird symbols. Lily tried to see if the symbols matched anything from Aunt Rose's old storybooks, but she had no clue. Jonah just wanted to leave. They finished up, crossing to the path that led back. Jonah took the lead. But as they climbed, the whispering grew louder, like a breeze that carried faint voices. Lily paused, scanning the trees. She thought she glimpsed a silhouette behind a trunk, but it vanished when she blinked. Her pulse quickened. "We're not alone," she muttered. Ava frowned. Could be just an animal. But doubt flickered in her eyes. They hurried on, footsteps echoing in the quiet forest. Up ahead, the path forked in a way they didn't recall. "Which turn did we take earlier?" Jonah asked, confusion mounting. Lily pointed left, but Ava was sure they came from the right. Jonah scratched his head. "We must have missed a marker." The forest suddenly felt endless, each tree looking the same. The whispering wind teased them as if guiding them deeper. They realized with a jolt, they might be lost. Anxiety prickled. The sun angled lower in the sky, shadows stretching. They had to find their way out soon. No one wanted to be stuck here after dark. Clutching their phone in each other's hands, they chose a direction, hoping it led back to Aunt Rose's fence line. The haunting hush of the whispering woods lingered, hinting that their trouble was only beginning. They walked briskly, scanning for familiar landmarks. The forest seemed to shift, each turn leading them to more trees and tangled brush. Jonah tried to keep calm, but he occasionally muttered, "I don't recognize this." Lily's eyes darted around, half expecting a phantom figure. Ava tried to stay bold, holding the phone's map app, but the signal was weak. A large log blocked the path at one point, forcing them around thick bushes. Briar scratched their legs. The sun dipped lower, beams of golden light dimming. "We gotta hurry," Ava urged. She didn't want them caught in the woods at night. They stumbled upon a small clearing with an old wooden bench half-rotted. A faint carving read, 1920. Jonah guessed maybe it was a rest spot from long ago. Lily felt creeped out. The bench looked lonely in the middle of nowhere. A breeze ruffled overhead branches, setting them swaying with a low hush. Suddenly, a soft whisper drifted near the bench. "Ava? Lily? Jonah?" The children froze. That was definitely their names. Lily gasped, looking around. No figure stood there. The voice sounded distant but close enough to send chills down their spines. Ava's heart pounded. She locked eyes with Jonah, who whispered, "That can't be the wind." Lily gripped Ava's arm. The voice repeated faintly, "Jonah? Lily? Ava?" as though testing each name. They realized the rumors about the woods might be real. Something in these trees knew them. Panicking, they bolted from the bench, not caring about direction. Twigs snapped underfoot as they raced through a thick patch of undergrowth. The whisper followed, layered with rustling leaves. Jonah tripped on a root, nearly falling, but they pulled him up. The fading sunlight painted the forest in eerie shadows. Finally, they reached a broad path again. Gasping for air, Ava checked her phone. No signal, battery at 10%. The group huddled, hearts thumping. "We must find the fence or any sign of Aunt Rose's property," Lily pleaded. Jonah nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. They pressed on, ignoring the throbbing in their legs. Another half-hour passed, the forest dimming further. The whisper no longer sounded close, but every now and then they caught a faint "Lily" or "Ava" rustling in the breeze. Jonah clenched his fists, furious at whatever was playing games with them. Just as the last rays of sunlight vanished, they spotted a break in the trees. Their hearts soared, expecting to see Aunt Rose's fence. Instead, they stepped into a clearing with a huge dead oak in the center. The ground around the trunk was bare, as if nothing grew near it. Something about the dead oak made their skin crawl. The bark was black, branches twisted like claws. Carvings scarred its trunk, similar to the symbols they saw by the river. A faint wind circled, carrying that whisper. The kids realized with horror that they were deeper in the woods than ever, trapped by the approaching night. They stood in the clearing, uncertain which way to turn, with the hush of the whispering woods swallowing the last light of day. Darkness fell fast. The cousins circled the dead oak, unsure what to do. Jonah tried to use his phone flashlight, but the battery dipped to 5%. Ava's phone wasn't better off. Lily swallowed her fear, whispering, "We should keep moving. Maybe we can find a place to hide or a path out." They picked a direction, guided only by phone flashlights and faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. Each step felt tense, the forest alive with shifting shadows. The whispering sound stayed at the edge of hearing, a constant hush that sometimes formed their names. Twigs snapped under their shoes. The wind rustled leaves overhead. Lily thought she saw eyes glinting in the dark, but when she swung the flashlight, nothing appeared. Jonah kept a firm grip on a sturdy stick he found in case he needed to defend them. Ava led, glancing at her phone screen as a weak map that barely loaded. At one point, they stumbled upon a small clearing with a stone well in the center. Moss covered its sides and the well had no bucket or rope. The kids felt uneasy. The whisper seemed louder here, swirling around the well's mouth. Mia peered inside with the flashlight, seeing only blackness. She had a sense something was at the bottom, staring back. They hurried away. As they walked, a new sound emerged, a soft giggle. It was faint, like a child's laugh. Lily froze, goosebumps rising. "What was that?" she breathed. Jonah tried to appear brave, but his voice shook, probably just an echo. "Come on." Eventually they found an overgrown trail that sloped upward, maybe leading out of the valley. They climbed, panting, hope rising that it might take them to the fence. But near the top, the path forked. Both routes looked dark and tangled. They argued which to choose, voices tight with panic. In the middle of their argument, that giggle returned, echoing among the trees. Then it transformed into a sad moan, drifting away. The kids felt their courage draining. Finally, Ava took the left path, pulling the others with her. "We can't stand here forever," she said firmly. The forest pressed in around them, branches snagging clothes. They glimpsed movement among the trunks, but each time they swung the light, emptiness greeted them. Jonah whispered, "It's like the woods itself is messing with us." Lily nodded, tears brimming. After another long, exhausting hike, they spotted a faint glow ahead. Could it be Aunt Rose's porch light? They stumbled faster, hearts pounding. Instead, they reached a small clearing with an abandoned cabin, a lantern glowing in its dusty window. Immediately they recalled their earlier run-in with a strange cabin. The memory of that barn caretaker or some other presence flashed in their minds. They froze. No sign of a person outside, but the lantern's flame flickered. The forest whispered all around, the wind picking up. The kids felt torn. Investigate or avoid it. Jonah looked around at the pitch-dark woods. Better than staying out here, Ava reasoned. Lily nodded fearfully. They approached the cabin door, hearts drumming, uncertain if they'd find shelter or fall deeper into the nightmare. They stood at the cabin's worn threshold, noticing cracks in the wooden door. Mia gently knocked. No answer. She pushed, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior with a single lantern on a table. Dust swirled in the glow. "Hello?" Jonah called softly. Silence. The cabin looked abandoned. Broken chairs, a half-collapsed shelf, and a musty smell. Lily's eyes darted around, half expecting someone to jump out. They stepped inside, closing the door behind them to keep out the chilling wind. "We'll rest here for just a bit," Ava said, voice wavering. The lantern's flame sputtered, but it gave enough light to see cobwebs and corners. Lily found a tattered blanket tossed on the floor. She picked it up, shaking off dust. "Might help us keep warm," she whispered. Jonah discovered a small pile of sticks near a cold fireplace. If they could get a fire going, maybe they'd last the night. Mia's phone battery beeped at 2%. She groaned, turning it off to save the last bit. "We can't rely on calls now," she said. They all realized no rescue call was possible. The world outside was pitch black, the forest hush broken only by occasional wind gusts. Jonah tried to light a fire in the cabin's fireplace with the sticks and a lighter he found in a drawer. It took a few tries, but soon a small flame crackled. Warmth spread, chasing away some fear. Lily sat close, hugging the dusty blanket around her shoulders. Ava paced, glancing at the door. Suddenly, a faint tapping sounded on the cabin wall. They froze. Tap, tap. Then silence. Mia moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Darkness pressed against the glass. "Could be a branch in the wind," she muttered. But a chill of doubt lingered. They decided to block the door with a chair. Lily helped push it, though it was rickety. The flickering fire cast shadows dancing on the walls. Jonah asked quietly, "What if something's out there?" Mia swallowed hard. "We'll keep watch in turns." So they made a plan. Jonah first watched, then Ava, then Lily, each for an hour. The other two would try to rest. They had no real clock, just the feel of time passing. The tapping did not repeat. The hush outside grew heavy, as though the forest listened for them. Jonah's watch began. He stood near the door, the firelight reflecting on his worried face. Mia and Lily dozed on the floor, the blanket over them. The wind moaned around the cabin, giving the impression of quiet voices swirling. Jonah's heart hammered, but he stayed alert, hand on a piece of wood for defense. Minutes felt like hours. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Jonah's mind replayed the barn, the shadowy figure, the endless trails. He prayed dawn would come quickly. At least here they had four walls, unless the walls were haunted too. In the flickering light, the cabin's shadows kept shifting, each shape a potential terror. Jonah blinked away fear, determined to protect his cousins. Jonah's watch passed without major incident, though every creak outside made him jump. He woke Ava for her turn, then lay down near the fire for a fitful sleep. Ava rubbed her eyes, standing guard by the door. The wind had calmed, but the hush felt eerie. A short while into Ava's watch, she heard that faint tapping again. Tap, tap, but from the roof this time. Her stomach flipped. She grabbed a log from the fireplace, stepping toward the center of the cabin. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. She peered up at the rafters, seeing only old beams. Then came a scraping noise at the cabin's back wall. Ava's heart pounded. She glanced at Lily and Jonah, who slept curled near the dying fire. She considered waking them, but tried to handle it alone. Slowly, she moved to the back window, shining her phone's flashlight, 1% battery, out the cracks. Nothing out there but black night. The scraping continued like claws on wood. Ava steeled her nerves. "Go away," she hissed softly, feeling silly. The sound paused, then a faint giggle drifted. Her blood ran cold. She recognized that giggle from the forest. She pressed her ear to the wall, hearing a whisper, "Ava, come outside." Ava staggered back, nearly dropping her phone. She refused to obey. Fear wrestled with anger. She decided to wake the others. Shaking Jonah's shoulder, she whispered, "Something's outside." Jonah jolted awake, Lily stirring too. They listened, hearing a last faint giggle, then silence. Lily's lips trembled. That giggle again. Jonah swallowed, grabbing the piece of wood. We can't just go out there. Ava nodded. The wind picked up once more, rattling the shutters. They prayed dawn was near. Another hour drifted by, tense but quiet. No more tapping. They took turns warming by the fire. Eventually it was Lily's watch. She sat close to the embers, hugging a blanket. Jonah and Ava dozed lightly behind her. The sky remained dark. Lily forced her eyes open, fighting drowsiness. She noticed the corners of the cabin were in deep shadow, even with the fire. She tried not to imagine shapes lurking there. At some point, Lily heard something soft, like a breath near her ear. She froze, eyes darting. She saw no one. The lamp flickered. Fear coiled in her stomach. She whispered, "Go away," voice shaky. The next moment, a gentle knock on the window. She stiffened, heart racing. The knock repeated, knock, knock. Lily mustered courage, stepping to the window. She parted the old curtain an inch, peering out. A pale face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. Lily gasped, dropping the curtain, stumbling back. She cried out, waking Ava and Jonah. They sprang up, asking what happened. Lily, tears in her eyes, stammered about a face at the window. Jonah rushed over, flinging the curtain. Nothing there. Just darkness and a swirl of dust in the reflection. Lily insisted, "I saw it." Pale face staring at me. Ava's heart pounded. The forest might not let them go so easily. They clung to each other, uncertain how to survive the night. The hush outside felt like a living thing. With every minute, they craved dawn's light more desperately. The wind moaned again, carrying faint laughs and whispers, as though mocking their terror from the other side of the walls. Eventually, the sky turned gray, signifying dawn's approach. The kids had barely slept, hearts thudding through the long night. When enough light crept in to see without the lantern, they felt a surge of hope. The outside world looked misty, but at least it wasn't pitch black. They decided to leave the cabin immediately. Carlos and Ben stoked the fire one last time to heat some leftover water, splashing their faces to wake up. Lily stared at the door, half expecting a figure to burst in, but all stayed still. The forest beyond was quiet in the morning hush. Packing their few items, they stepped outside. Morning dew clung to grass around the cabin. Fog drifted among the trees. Ava looked around, seeing no footprints from the night's tapping or giggling. That made it creepier, like whatever visited left no trace. They walked away from the cabin, trying to guess which direction led back to Aunt Rose's house. Jonah rubbed his stiff shoulders, complaining about the next challenge, finding a real path. Lily wiped tears from her eyes, still shaken by the pale face at the window. Ava patted her arm, murmuring, "We'll get out of here." The woods in daylight felt different but still carried a lingering dread. Mist curled around tree trunks and the ground squished under their shoes. Now and then they paused to listen for the whisper, but only birds chirped softly. Perhaps the haunting presence slept during the day, or lurked deeper in the shadows. A short distance from the cabin, they discovered a faint trail heading east. They followed it, relief growing as the forest gradually thinned. The morning sun brightened, revealing ferns and wildflowers. Jonah recognized some plants from a nature book. They walked faster, fueled by hope that this was the right route. Finally, they glimpsed a fence line ahead, rusted wire with a sagging post. Lily's heart leaped. Maybe that's near Aunt Rose's property. They rushed to the fence, scanning beyond. Indeed, they saw the outlines of houses in the distance. They cheered, hugging each other. Moments later, they found a break in the fence, slipping through. They ended up on a gravel road that led into the outskirts of Everglade. This area wasn't far from Aunt Rose's. By noon, they trudged up Aunt Rose's driveway, exhausted but safe. She burst out the front door, tears of relief, scolding them for worrying her again. After a frantic round of hugs and a big meal, the kids recounted their night in the cabin, the tapping, and the faces in the window. Aunt Rose listened wide-eyed. She believed them, urging them never to go near the deeper woods again. She said, "That place is known for strange happenings." The cousins agreed wholeheartedly. Even though they escaped the cabin and the forest's night terrors, a nagging feeling remained that the whispering woods kept secrets. Their experiences would haunt them. But for now, they basked in the comfort of Aunt Rose's home, thankful to be back in the realm of normal daylight and warm smiles. Over the next few days, the cousins stayed close to Aunt Rose's yard. She forbade them from venturing into the woods again, which they readily accepted. They spent time reading, playing board games, and baking cookies instead. The terror of the whispering forest and the night in the cabin still weighed on their minds, causing nightmares occasionally. Aunt Rose decided to share some local lore after dinner one evening. She sat them on the porch, cool breeze in the air. "Those woods have old ghost stories," she began, voice gentle. "Some folks claim long ago a group of travelers got lost there, never found again. Others speak of a restless spirit that calls out names, hoping to trap people in darkness." The kids shivered, thinking about the whispers they heard. Aunt Rose insisted these were just legends, but her grave tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure they were fake. She added, "People say there's a hidden power that makes trails shift, leading wanderers in circles." The cousins exchanged uneasy looks, remembering how they got lost. Despite the warnings, a part of Ava felt curious about what exactly lurked in those woods. Lily, on the other hand, wanted no more adventures. Jonah was torn. He hated fear but disliked unanswered questions. However, they all agreed to respect Aunt Rose's rule and not return. A few nights later, heavy rain battered Everglade, lightning striking across the sky. The cousins huddled inside playing cards. A sudden knock came at the door, startling them. Aunt Rose answered, finding a neighbor who reported hearing strange howling from the forest's edge. He worried an injured animal or something else needed checking. Aunt Rose politely said she'd informed the local ranger. The mention of howling made the cousins recall the weird laughter or giggles they heard. Their hearts pounded a bit. Aunt Rose gave them a comforting smile, urging them not to worry. "We're safe here." They nodded, trying to believe it. Soon, the local ranger showed up in a muddy truck. He spoke with Aunt Rose and the neighbor, then drove off to investigate the forest perimeter. The kids peered from a window, watching the ranger's taillights vanish into the rainy night. Fear and relief mixed in their chests. Fear that the forest might have new horrors, relief someone else was handling it. Morning light revealed the ranger's truck parked by the roadside, but he was nowhere in sight. Concern grew. Aunt Rose told the kids to stay indoors as she phoned the authorities. The kids peeked from windows, hearts thudding. Had the ranger encountered that ghostly presence? The hush in the house thickened. A second official arrived, searching the forest edge. The kids glimpsed him rummaging around near the fence line. Eventually, the ranger emerged, muddy but unharmed. He explained that he found no sign of a large animal, just some odd footprints leading to the fence. He shrugged, calling it a false alarm. Yet his eyes looked troubled. The kids sensed something more was happening. Aunt Rose gently shooed them away from the windows, telling them not to dwell on it. But how could they forget the chilling experiences? The whispering woods seemed active, calling out in wind and shadows. The cousins felt it was only a matter of time before something else stirred behind those tall pines. As summer neared its end, the cousins prepared to head back to their own homes, hundreds of miles away. They felt both relief and sadness. Relief to escape the haunting presence of the whispering woods, sadness to leave Aunt Rose and the simpler joys of Everglades farmland. On their final day, Aunt Rose organized a small goodbye party. She cooked a hearty meal and a few neighbors came, bringing pies and homemade jam. The cousins laughed and ate, trying to forget the creepy forest. They played tag on the lawn, safe in the warm afternoon sun. When the guests left, Aunt Rose pulled them aside. She said gently, "I know you had a tough time with those scary experiences. Just remember, fear can't keep you from living. But do respect places that feel wrong. Sometimes it's best to leave a mystery alone." The kids nodded, grateful for her advice. Late that evening, they gathered on the porch, suitcases packed for the morning's bus ride. The sky glowed with stars, no clouds in sight. Jonah joked that maybe the forest was giving them a break on their last night. Lily held Ava's hand, her gaze drifting to the shadowy treeline. They all thought about the phantom cabin, the carved stones by the river, the hush that spoke their names. Ava wondered if the ghostly presence was truly real, or if some living trickster was out there. The memory of the man's face at the barn still chilled her. As they watched the moon rise, a soft breeze ruffled the leaves. Aunt Rose joined them, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. She said, "You've all grown braver here. Even though it scared you, you faced something and survived." That reassurance gave them a spark of pride. With a final look at the distant woods, they stepped inside. Tomorrow, the cousins would split up, each returning to normal life. Ava to the city, Jonah and Lily to suburbs far away. They promised to keep in touch, maybe plan a safer adventure next time. Morning arrived bright and calm. Aunt Rose drove them to the bus station in her old car. Birds chirped along the road and the farmland looked peaceful. The cousins felt a weight lifting from their shoulders as they left the area of the whispering woods behind. At the station, they hugged Aunt Rose fiercely, tears in their eyes. She waved as they boarded the bus, telling them to visit again, minus ghost hunts. The bus pulled away, carrying them onto a highway lined with pine trees. Jonah pressed his face to the window, scanning the last glimpse of Everglade. Lily sat quiet, lost in thought. Ava typed a note on her phone writing, "We made it out." Though they headed home with relief, each cousin knew the Whispering Woods would remain a memory of wonder and dread. They had encountered a place where whispers carried names in the wind, where old cabins held unseen watchers, and where, for a moment, they felt the boundary between the living and the unknown grow very thin.